Hi, I'm Jake, and today we're continuing the multi-part Death Guard series and going over which units I think you should and should not consider for your lists. Welcome back to part 2 of the 9th edition Death Guard video series. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, which covered the general overview, you can check that out first, here or through the link in the description. If you've already seen it, thank you so much for returning back to check this one out. As I mentioned in the previous video, I'm not a really big fan of labeling tier levels on units when discussing competitive Warhammer due to how situational that can really be. But that doesn't mean counting or certain units don't outshine others and vice versa, of course. It just really comes down to what you're trying to accomplish, followed by choosing the right tools that support said goal. I have spent a lot of time analyzing this awesome new Death Guard codex, and by now I can say I've had enough time to purge out my 8th edition perspectives to truly adapt to the changes rather than react or try to make something that worked previously work now. The scale we're going to be using today, which is simple to say the least, is if a unit is mentioned as good, they're good. If a unit is mentioned as bad, you should really think twice about what and how they're going to work for you. Everything else in between in the respective categories is deemed situational or I'd say mediocre at best. I am going to assume that you either already have the Death Guard Codex or plan to look at each data sheet after watching this video, which means I won't be outlining every single stat line or detail in order to keep the video within a reasonable duration. Now let's dive into it and go over my unit choices, categorized of course by force organization. For HQ choices, my top choice here is the Malignant Plaguecaster. At 95 points, knowing 2 spells, and filling in an HQ slot for your detachments, I just find him to be efficient all around, which is why I've chosen him to be first, since he finds his way into every list of mine pretty much to this date. Plus, should he find himself in close combat, his staff can do some damage. Go look it up. Next up is the Lord of Contagion. He's just a massive beatstick with top-notch defensive stats, so 2-up save, 4-up invul, which can even be further improved using Warlord traits, giving him extra toughness or an extra wound or transhuman physiology. On top of this durability, he tends to put out a surprising amount of damage. I really like paying the 5 points to add the Orb of Desiccation with the Man Reaper, which can come in quite handy if you plan to deep strike him, alongside some Terminators for support. But the real cherry on top for this HQ character choice is that he innately has a 3-inch range extension to his Contagion abilities. Overall, he's just solid, and he can be tough for your opponent to remove. It's the best. I'm going to address Typhus and the Demon Prince as not being great, but certainly not being bad by any measure. Just both being highly situational, and don't get me wrong, I love you my Demon Princes in 8th edition, but now that we're back to not being able to give him a Plague Weapon, is in my eyes overcosted as well, especially with wings. On paper, I want to love and include either one of these choices, but I can't help but reverting back to the more efficient Lord of Contagion or even the Lord of Virulence options, which I prefer in my shooting lists. While we don't have a wide range of HQ options, none are bad per se, but I personally don't see any purpose in considering the Chaos Lords, although they're far more improved from the previous codex since they actually have the Death Guard abilities and keywords. But between negligible point savings with not a whole lot to offer, the named Death Guard Lords are simply the way to go. For troop choices, Poxwalkers, baby! Man, oh man, have I bullied some armies with these bad boys. They come in at a measly 50 points per 10-man squad, and by spending just 1 CP for the Mutant Strain strat, you can dish out some really reliable mortal wounds. I have found a lot of success in running 50 to 60 Poxwalkers in my lists. It forces a real target priority decision from your opponent, because if these Poxwalkers come too close to an enemy, they can absolutely shred them apart. Additionally, if they're being shot at, they're absorbing firepower away from your more valuable units, such as Terminators, Plague Marines, or whatever else your army consists of. While Poxwalkers can't perform actions outside of Spread the Sickness, which is the Death Guard secondary, that's honestly a sufficient utility for them, even if that's all they do the entire game. And interestingly enough, for me, Plague Marines can be MVPs or can just crumble to firepower since they don't have an invul save. My favorite way to run Plague Marines are in 10-man squads with 2 flails, a mace, and a cleaver, if I have the points for it. They do, of course, rely heavily on making it into combat, as well as potentially being CP intensive, to take advantage of the wound spillover strat, or as well as some of the others like the trench fighters, but no joke, they tend to destroy everything they touch with this combination, literally everything. As much as I dislike non-open top transports, I do suggest considering delivering them in a Rhino just to get that extra movement. Even if it really is only an extra 6 inches, it can count. Now, cultists, this are obviously our only third option here, but cultists are a unit you really have to think twice about. For starters, they don't have Disgustingly Resilient, they don't have Contagions of Nurgle, and are only toughness 3, and they're scaredy cats. They like to run away. I've had some minor success. When running 20 to 30 of them simply to perform actions, but also alongside Poxwalkers, since we can take one of each for every Plague Marine or Terminator choice. But any opponent worth their weight they're just going to start picking off your cultists, especially if they know that you've taken Raise the Banners. If you've discovered something that I've missed, I'd love to hear more about it in the comments, but that's my stance right now. They can work, but think twice. My favorite elites. My absolute favorite of the elite troop choices, or the elite choices, non-character, because we'll do that separately, are Blightlord Terminators. I can't praise them enough. I was lucky enough to recently actually procure 2 more box sets of these, so now I have a total of 20, and I'm trying to squeeze them all into one of my lists. I'm going to try an 18-man configuration actually tonight against my Necron's opponent, but we'll see. But I do like to run them standard with Combi Bolters only. Flails, of course, never leave home without flails. And sometimes, depending on what the rest of my list looks like, I'll take some Blight Launchers. Notably, Combi Bolters do pump out a ton of shots, but not having AP usually gets shrugged off by most elite troops, which are prevalent in the meta. But with 24-inch range, they can definitely be used to lick off the last final wounds off a threat, or some low save scoring units off an objective. But just don't get too excited when you start rolling 40 dice on your turn 10-mans. What I'm saying is just be realistic about your expectations. When I got my hands on 9 Deathshroud Terminators, I was trying to plug them into every single list that I could. They're really no joke, and most certainly can't be ignored if they're on the board. However, the more and more I ran them, I found more utility in using them for their bodyguard role in a single 3-man squad. That was pretty much it. They're a bit more costly than Blightlords with the same defensive strats, but really shouldn't be exposed on their own whatsoever. I like to think of them and use them more so as a cleanup crew to kind of... Notably, their scythe weapon profile should almost always be the one you go with, unless there's a very specific situation that calls for it. But especially if you're running the Professor of Biologist Putrefier, for the mortal wound output, you'll want the weight of dice, and Deathshroud are just a really solid choice no matter what, paired with a Professor of Biology, or I keep calling it a Professor of Biology, but that's fine. They're just incredible. Okay, look, I have 3 of these, and I tried my darndest to make them work, but unfortunately, I can't. What is? Hellbrutes. They don't have an invul, and their weapon choices are mediocre. We have access to so much better vehicle choices. That's pretty much all I have to say about it. I want to love them, but I just can't. Now let's talk about elite characters. Starting off with the Tallyman, I'll come out and say he's an auto take. Basically guarantees 1 CP per battle round and has an ability to tally 1 core unit per turn for a +1 to hit. And my favorite relic for shooting lists, of course, is the Tollkeeper relic, which generates additional shots on hit rolls of 6s. On core units only, but he's just too good not to take. CP, can buff your shots, it's awesome. Next up is the Foul Blightspawn, and he's almost an auto take. I think he got hated on a lot more when the codex came out, which he shouldn't have, just because his weapon profile and stratagems got nerfed. I get it. But who cares? You want him for the fight last ability and never counts as charging relic. You can absolutely control the board and the fights just with proper positioning of the Foul Blightspawn. I've had opponents actually swerve their entire flanks away from the Foul Blightspawn just to get away from this Death Star blob that was following him. I do want to address the Plague Surgeon, since he is a popular choice of many conversations regarding Death Guard, but the best way I can put it is this. I love the idea of him, but I just can't justify him ever. I'd just rather take another Terminator for the points and some extra toys to just get a 6-up feel no pain. Unless you have weighted dice, you're not going to roll that much, and the D3 heal, of course. It's just not worth it in my opinion. Lastly, if the Noxious Blightbringer was even cheaper than he was, I Probably still wouldn't suggest him. +1 movement. Okay, next. We don't have many choices in the fast attack category, but we should touch on bloat drones. Bloat drones with flesh mowers specifically can be an absolute monster, or monsters, depending on how many you run. I'd say the spitters even still have a place in this edition or this version, but I prefer other choices within this points bracket. I just think there's better ways to use X amount of points. Since the list is short, I'll bundle in the Mephitic Blight Hauler, which still remains good on paper, but what I personally consider other options because of the core keyword mechanic. Just not having the rerolls is a substantial crutch, meaning you can completely whiff. I was running a configuration of 2x3 Mephitic Blight Haulers in the old book, and having the rerolls from like a Demon Prince or whatever else was backing it up was great. You know, don't get me wrong, if you want the speed to back up the rest of your army, it's a notable consideration, but there are, in my opinion, other choices. So maybe kind of consider both before you're plugging them into your list. Hey, remember when entropy cannons were just straight garbage? Well, I sure do. In this edition, Plagueburst Crawlers made a smashing comeback with their 3-up ballistic skill, arguably higher durability thanks to the change in Disgustingly Resilient. Of course, that doesn't apply to all guns being fired at it. You've got some certain guns in the meta right now that can just absolutely pierce it. But on average, these tanks can absorb even more firepower than before. Both the entropy and the mortars are plague weapons, which absolutely help a lot, assuming you connect the hits. But these buff dudes can park in your back line, deny deep striking in from your opponent, as well as just score your home objectives. They're really tough to remove at toughness 8. I really like Plagueburst Crawlers, but I still get very salty when I whiff on all of my entropy hits. I think I had an average game where I actually only had like a 20% successful hit rate across 3 tanks. Again, not too many choices in the heavy slots, but the standout shouldn't take here is the Land Raider. 285 points for what? Transporting Terminators that can already deep strike? I really don't see the point. Just take more Terminators for that amount of points. But Jake, Land Raiders come with 2 twin las cannons, so you'll probably miss those 4 shots anyway. Joking, obviously. I'm sure you could make a Land Raider work if you really wanted to, just like you can make almost anything work, but we're talking optimal choices here. All right, the last and final unit we're going to go over is Mortarion. He pretty much carried my Nurgle, and he did carry my Nurgle Demon Death Guard Soup Army in all of 8th edition. And when his new profile came out, people were saying how unkillable he was. That is, until players took about 10 minutes to figure out how to counter him, which honestly is far too easy to do in my opinion. Boatload of positives, don't get me wrong, like having a 3-up save, 4-up invul, 5-up feel no pain, but you can't ignore the fact that it's still a 490 point model being sunk into one model. Yes, you can buff himself. He can buff himself or any other Death Guard unit. He uses Death Guard keyword or a core character. Or sorry, he can buff a Death Guard core unit or a Death Guard character. I want to love him. Every time I write a competitive list, very specifically a competitive list, I can't. So that's my overview of the unit choices that we have access to in the Death Guard Codex. If you think I may have missed anything, or if you have even a different perspective on what I thought was good versus bad, feel free to drop a comment. My word is not gold here. This is just me sharing my own personal competitive playstyle experience. So drop a comment. For the next and final video in this competitive Death Guard series, I'll be going over play companies, stratagem combinations, deadly pathogens, relics, warlord traits, contagion disciplines, and most importantly, some basic competitive tabletop strategy to tie everything we've been talking about in, because that's what matters when you hit the tabletop. So that's it for today, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in, and if you found this video to be helpful or informative by any measure, please stay subscribed and join in on the conversation in the comments below, which greatly helps production of more content. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.